guys for coming. We're glad you're here.
Very glad. I'm flattered even.
Well, to introduce ourselves, my name's Kennedy. Or Cheshnian, if you will. I'm the writer part of the team for Tamarind, which is an epic fantasy webcomic. I am co-writer. I write a couple of the characters for the comic, and I do the artwork, and I do a lot of the putting stuff together and destroying it and mushing it around and editing stuff. And I also worked on a comic called Shades of Veil for about, 4 years, which is on hiatus right now, but we're going to do something with that at some point.
My name is Ryan Thompson. I'm a bit of a noob at webcomics. I've only been doing it for about a year officially. I do the webcomic Fajita, which is like a fantasy epic with lots of other stuff mixed in there too. Yeah, and I write and draw for that. So it's kind of just like I'm going out on a limb. I'm trying to see if people like it at all, and people really have. So there you go. I'm happy with that.
I'm John Lotshaw. I write and draw Accidental Centaurs, fantasy, action, adventure, comedy with humor, or alleged humor. That's been running since 2002, relaunched this year, rebooted. And I also have the honor of publishing the work of Bill Holbrook, creator of Kevin and Kel, longest running, continually updated daily comic on the web. Been running since 1995, so that means I have lots of books to sell. Please come by and buy so I can afford to go home. But, no, seriously, it's an honor to get to work with a talent like Bill. So.
Okay, well, welcome to How to Make a Webcomic. We will try to answer all of your questions to the best of our ability.
Nice disclaimer there. Best of our ability. Gives us a big loophole.
And since we're not sure what the best of our ability is, and neither do you, so
that's the important part. They don't know either.
We'll have to find out as we go.
They don't know we're making this up as we.
All right. So I'm not sure exactly where to begin, except for with the idea
Well,
of making a book.
where are y'all in terms of what you want to do? Where are you in the process? Are you thinking you might want to do a webcomic? Have you tried doing one yet, or where are you at?
We're strictly in the idea.
Okay.
Oh,
Okay.
well,
So we're like at the very,
Okay.
well, that's the most important part.
That is the most important part.
It's the foundation for everything.
It is.
Without a good idea, you really don't have anything. I mean, you can make a comic, just doing what somebody else is doing, but what is that? The idea is the most important part, and our original idea is priceless. That's why there's, that's why people make such a big deal of copyright, and things like that.
And I also think that this is an area where most people who try to do webcomics fall down. Webcomics kind of have a bad rep among professional cartoonists. I'm also a member of the National Cartoon Society. And among those folks who are mainly syndicated newspaper daily strip cartoonists, webcomics have kind of got a bad reputation among them. Of course, who cares what they think? But because a lot of webcomics get started and then they'll disappear after 6 weeks. And a lot of the reason why is because the idea was behind the strip wasn't good enough to support a long-term commitment. Also, it was just something. Hey, let's make a comic. And 6 weeks later, 6 months later, it hasn't been updated, and nobody hears from them ever again, and it becomes a zombie on the web.
Yeah, it actually brought up something that's also probably the second in the 10 Commandments of webcomics. That you should always update. Once you have a good idea, once you know what you're doing, do not forget to update. I've seen many a good comic just die because of, I mean, and sometimes you can't avoid it. Life happens, stuff like that. But you can do the smart thing and you know, prepare ahead of time. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Because I mean, my comic updates Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays. On weekends, I have to go to conventions. I can't work over the weekend to do the Monday page because it updates the Friday I leave, and then updates the Monday that I wake up after the convention. You know, and so I just work ahead of time so I don't miss it. And because I've been into webcomics since I was 13. So I've been reading a lot, and as a reader, nothing really ticked me off more than going to my favorite page, and the guy's like, oops, you know, here's some filler for you, you know. I mean, and that's all fine and good. I mean, sometimes you can't avoid it, and so I'm not going to be too hard at all, because I'm not going to say that I haven't missed my few days. But
it's also a good idea to develop your idea really well ahead of time, because then the more you're patient with getting stuff up on the web, the more time you have to really think it through and go back and edit stuff. Like if you kind of write yourself into a corner, you have time to be like, wait a second, we have to rethink this part. So don't be in a big hurry, just focus on your story and making your, well, if you have a continual story.
A piece of advice that ties into that was a piece of advice that was given to me by Bill Holbrook, and he got it directly from Charles Schulz about developing an idea. He said, draw 50 strips, set them aside, come back a few days later and look at them. Out of that 50, there's going to be maybe 5 that are any good. Throw the rest away. Take the 5 and then figure out what worked in those strips and build on that and draw 50 more.
it's incredible.
And then set those aside, and you come back, maybe 10 of them will be worth your time. And just keep that process going. And as you do that, you will refine your characters, you will refine your story, and you will find out if it is something that you can't not do. That the story and the characters are so compelling that you can't not draw them, or you can't not tell stories about them. I have been trying to work on develop a second webcomic, and I have yet to find something that I couldn't not get away from. I tried to put Accidental Centaurs on hiatus in order to focus on other projects, and I couldn't stop thinking about those characters because they had become so real to me, and I had so many story ideas for them. I couldn't not do that strip, which is kind of frustrating because it doesn't sell that many books. But you know, there it is. But the point is that it's something that it has to be a compulsion, that you are going to explode if you don't do these strips with these characters and these situations.
Yeah, it's essential. I mean, just complimenting that. Really, the best works we all know have a life of their own. When we look at our favorite comics, we don't. So the first thing we see is a comic. We don't see the person that did it. We see the comic. We see the characters. We see the impact they've made on our lives, things like that. You know, we don't. The first thought when we think of Spider-Man, we think of Spider-Man, Peter Parker, Mary Jane, etc., etc., etc. And depending on when you were raised, the set of characters that goes with that. I mean, and then afterwards we think of it and we go, oh yes, it's Stan Lee, you know, and all the other artists. But the first thing we see is, you know, the world. We see how engaging the characters are. The fact that it has a life of its own. It doesn't feel like a story. It has a sense of reality to it. And the key to that is like, you know, as was said earlier, is really the development of an idea. And lots of people have lots of different ways of doing that. In fact, for example, the 50 strip idea, I was like, I should have done that. You know, I mean, I feel bad now but I mean, and sometimes.
And that advice came from a really good source.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you what, take that over anything I said. But I mean, in my experience, a lot of times for me, I've been lucky enough that characters I've developed that are compelling to people and that people like, it's oftentimes a stroke of accidental genius, and I do stress accidental genius. That all the good ideas I've had for my comic, I can say from my experience, the way my comic runs is it's essentially a bunch of my rejected ideas put together into one story, allowing me to scratch just about every artistic itch I have. I have a lot of different ideas, and my story actually comes together from my combining those ideas in a world in which they all can coexist. And all of a sudden, oh yes, I like this, you know. And also, another key is that, you know, even though you can like something and your readers don't, you also want to like what you're doing. I mean, you know, you want to feel compelled to do this. You want to be in love with your idea, because if you don't care, people can tell you don't care. You know, it shows because you don't feel it, and you're the one breathing life into the characters. You're the one breathing life into the story. So if you're not, if that's not, you know, what you're doing, it shows. I mean, so definitely well-developed ideas and ideas that come from the heart, ideas that are a part of you. I mean, the more invested you are in the ideas that you're presenting, the more likely you are to put heart into them. That's the way I look at it.
I think it also depends on what kind of comic you want to do, too.
Right.
Now, we have a long-running...
Well, it is planned to be long running.
It's been up since January, but we have 2 years of script under our belt. So
That was my next question. So far ahead.
Yeah. Well, we started ours as a, hey guys, want to role play or something, just to do something together.
Right.
We have
Well, we've been writing it over Gmail
chat.
so we have all the scripts saved,
Mhm.
and we can go back and look at
That's a good idea.
yeah.
what happened and print them out and cut them apart and move the scenes around and scratch half of it.
Write new scenes where the you know, the comic doesn't necessarily follow it would be bad if it followed the chat log all the time. You know, you have to, I call them roundouts, but you know, there are information that we have to describe to the reader that's not in the chat log.
Like what's happening with the villains, to add a little bit of dramatic tension in there, that kind of thing.
Yeah, you don't have to have 2 years of script. We just all of a sudden decided, like, what can we do with this?
Well, the other comic that I worked on was also based on a role-playing game. It was my college roommate's D&D campaign, and the DM had come up with such a complex idea for his story and such good NPCs and all of this stuff that I was like, hey, let's make it into a comic and share this story with people. And so we had the basic story written down. I mean, we had it constructed already, but we didn't have it written down. So he would, sometimes he would, like, we would work out how the scenes needed to play out and what information needed to be included in the pages that we were giving the audience, because this is also a mystery. So the construction of it was pretty important. But, yeah, sometimes for the actual written final version of the script, he would be giving it to me like 2 or 3 weeks before the page is supposed to go up. So, as far as scripting goes, it also always works best to have work in advance. And also that way, if you're working with chapters as a unit, you can go back and look over and like see the chapter as a whole rather than as like weekly installments.
Yeah, we can go through and break the chapters out of and break them down, and then when it comes time, we probably have about a month, 6 weeks maybe left of chapter 3, and so I can break out chapter 4 and we can have it edited and all ready to go by the time before chapter 4 is even due to come out. When life doesn't get in the way.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the writing process is like, for most people, I'm sure, is really in 2 stages. And the one part that I do most ahead of time, I mean, months, maybe even years ahead of time, is of course, the general plot. You know what happens. I mean, before you even write it. I mean, because with me scripting, is a lot of it is improv. I actually, a lot of times, I won't write the script for a particular page until I've got like a week left. I mean, now that's part of that is bad procrastination on my part. I do not recommend that, but it's allowed me to pull off some pretty big dialogue. A lot of times, in particular, dialogue will be a certain way, and then I'll realize, you know what, that doesn't feel right. I'm going to change that, and it actually changes the entire tone of what's being said. So dialogue on my part is improv. Script writing is about 2 to 3 weeks ahead of time. And the plotting, you know, of course, without a plot, you need the direction of a plot. You know, a plot can be just as simple as, you know, he goes there, he does that, he dies. You know, and then the script works out kind of the details of that. And you know, but when it comes to big story, the bigger the scope of what I'm writing is, the further ahead in time I want to do that. And then really the more you know, the less important it is, the more time I have, in my opinion, to give it. And that's when it comes to like a graphic novel style comic, that it follows a long storyline and things like that.
It's not always necessary, just talking about writing, to have the entire plot worked out beforehand. I mean, I know I've read that Stephen King doesn't like working from outlines. He just keeps writing because he feels like it's more organic that way, and then he can go back and change stuff around.
I agree. There's a definite strength in that. Sometimes, depending on what story you're doing, like if you're doing something like Stephen King, actually it helps if you do make it up a little bit as you go along. If you are surprised yourself by what's happening.
Yeah, with ours, she had the general concept for the story, and we had a direction we knew the characters needed to go in, and we know this goal needs to be met eventually. But along the way, the characters have dragged it off in some interesting directions.
And they will do that as they become more fleshed out and more real to you. They'll start talking to you. They'll start taking you off in ways that you never anticipated. Sometimes it will take your entire story and turn it upside down and inside out. And
don't fight them.
Don't fight them.
Don't fight. They know what they want.
They know where they need to
what
go.
you're doing.
It will happen. What will happen is if you get characters that you care about and that are real to you, that'll happen.
Yeah, amen.
And when you look back on it and say, how did we end up here? It happens.
And you will have side characters who will suddenly go, I have a story, want to hear it?
Yeah, I call those Fonzies.
Yeah.
Because Fonzie was originally a secondary character. He was they had him in a windbreaker in his first episode because the network wouldn't let him wear a leather jacket. And he took over Happy Days. He took over the show. There are many instances that Urkel is another character that took over the show. It was supposed to be this one-off character, and all of a sudden, next thing you know, the show's about them. And sometimes that'll happen. You'll have these characters that were supposed to be just walk on to deliver this one line, and all of a sudden, you're finding more depth to them, and finding them sometimes more interesting than your main characters. And there are comic strips where they started out with one main character, and all of a sudden the secondary character walks on and walks off with the strip.
We started out with 4 main characters, and now we have like 20 at any given time. I don't know.
After these secondary characters come in, and then they go on their way, and they're still doing stuff, and sometimes they're still telling you what they're doing, even though they're not on camera, and then they pop back up in the story later. But I'd also say, don't worry if your ideas are still in the formulation stages, and you're like, oh, but I don't have any really compelling characters yet. I'm always a little afraid before I start writing a character because I'm not sure who they are yet or what they're doing. what they're gonna be like, but once I get into it and get like a couple writing sessions down, then they'll start telling me. So, yeah, just trust your characters, trust yourself to be able to, like, I know they were saying you have to be really, really invested in your story to be very good at making it into a webcomic that's a constant commitment to producing material. But if stuff's not working quite right at first, then just give it a little time and play around with it. And if it's meant to be, stuff will start falling together.
And if it's not going the way you want, check in with your characters.
Yes.
You know, ask them, you know, and they may, I like to play 20 versions of my characters sometimes. Why did you do that? And, you know, and a lot of times, once you get to know them really well, it's like having a bunch of people walking around in your head, and literally you're not schizophrenic or, you know, or paranoid or whatever.
Yeah, see, comic artists is the only people you can talk to this about, and they won't look at you weird.
Yeah. But they will answer questions for you. And sometimes, if you're going, I don't understand where that came from. I write a lot of improv. And a lot of times stuff will come up like, why on earth did you just do that? You screwed up what I had planned, but it was right for them. It was right for the character to do that thing. And then later on, it will tie back into the story or tie back into the plot in a way that I never even expected.
Yeah, a really good example that I like to remind myself of. I forgot exactly where I read it, but it's really that, you know, well-developed characters. Really, once you get to know them well enough, once you've developed them in your mind well enough, you know how they're going to react when given a certain situation. You can put them. Basically, you could take your characters, lock them in a room, put an egg in the middle of the room, and you could tell me what they're going to do, how they're going to react. But you know, I mean, you know, depending on how, you know, sometimes there are characters that can be made more intentionally flat. You know, so you wouldn't necessarily have to answer that. But for characters that you want to appear convincing or real or three-dimensional, that they have some depth to them, definitely put them in some bizarre situations and just ask yourself, you know, what would they do? What would they do in this situation? You know, would they just destroy the egg or whatever? I like to go for when I develop characters, I like to go for strong archetypes, or basically there's one particular thing about this character that is very strong. Maybe it's arrogance, maybe it's manipulativeness, maybe it's weakness, caring, you know, the golden-hearted warrior, quietness. I usually, because those are big things. I mean, maybe I'm slow that way, but to me, it's easier to manage characters where I can read. I do very cartoony style, so a lot of times my characters, you can look at them and know what they're about. Because it's kind of like, you know, Snow White and Seven Dwarfs almost. Yeah.
Well, having a character being an archetype like that, especially main characters at the beginning, is a good place to start because it gives you some place to go.
Right.
It gives you somewhere for character development and expansion to occur. And to me, as a writer and a reader of comics, that's far more interesting than you know, a big battle sequence. Right. Is seeing how a character develops over time. When I relaunched my strip, I completely changed the central relationship between the two main characters from one where they were in a relationship to one where they were in a relationship that was completely different, where they were openly antagonistic towards each other. And I set up that they are supposed to, in the future, be back in the same type of relationship that I had in the original strip. But now we're going to see that relationship build and grow over time, which is far more interesting than, boom, there they are.
Absolutely, and to add, you know, to what he said is really, you don't have to necessarily go with the archetype, like make a dopey, sneezy, you know, whatever. Really more than that, it's you use an archetype as a framework from which to develop your character. A really good idea is, I mean, I don't know how much anime any of you guys watch, but there's a particular one, Neon Genesis Evangelion. It's a giant robot anime. Anyway, there's a really arrogant character in there one of the pilots, and she starts off kind of at this, you just think she's a total twit, because she's arrogant, she's airheaded, she cannot see past herself, she wants to do everything on her own, she will not let anybody, top her. And then, as time goes on, you begin to realize, well, she's actually a very fragile, malfunctioning character with a bad background, whose arrogance is really her overcompensating for her own lack of self-worth, and really using that arrogance as a framework. You can see where that character went. We begin to learn more, but we started out with knowing that this character is arrogant, and then the character development comes from, now we're going to understand why, or okay, now we know why, now where do we go? What do I put this character into? And does she prove herself? Does she die trying? One of those things. It's
And I'm showing my age by making my second 70s sitcom reference here. But another example of this would be like what they did on MASH with Hot Lips. Hot Lips started out as nothing but a shrill antagonist for Hawkeye and BJ. And over time, they began to flesh out the character of Margaret Houlihan. She became more sympathetic. And you saw the development of the character moving from this very buffoonish, rigid, strict army type to a more realistic, three-dimensional person who was not always, she was sometimes played the antagonist to Hawkeye and BJ, but there was a more sympathetic angle to it. And the character really developed and became much more three-dimensional, became a fully realized character as the show progressed. And she became more interesting. And they didn't do the same thing with the character that she was paired up with, which was Frank Burns. They kept writing him as this buffoonish, cartoonish goof. And the actor got tired of it and he left the show. And when they replaced him with somebody who was more three-dimensional. So it's always a good idea, especially if you're doing a narrative type strip. This isn't going to work that well if you're doing like a gag-a-day strip, because the whole idea is that it's just jokes. Yeah. But if you're doing a narrative strip, which I believe is what we're all doing up here, then you've got to have some room for the characters to grow.
And characters
I was just going to say, sometimes, like he was saying about having a really arrogant character and then slowly revealing what that really means and why the character is like that. Sometimes you don't know yourself until the character tells you as the story goes on.
And that's where that Stephen King thing comes in. Because sometimes it's good if you don't know yourself where the character comes from, and then as you write it, you are surprised yourself, and then if you're surprised, other people are going to be surprised.
Yeah, they have secrets they'll keep from you.
Which is awesome.
And you won't, you'll be like, why? And they will not tell you. Some of them will not tell you until they've decided to reveal it themselves. They're not ready.
And the best thing about three-dimensional, believable characters is that unlike usually, if you're doing a gag or whatever, it's not necessary for an audience to connect or to feel sympathy for, unless of course it's Charlie Brown. But Charlie Brown had depth. I feel for the guy. But if you're doing like a narrative, the power of the narrative or whatever it is you remember, like I said before, is the characters and the fact that people can identify with these characters. What made Spider-Man so different was, and I've watched many documentaries on Spider-Man, what made him so different is that it was Peter Parker. Peter Parker was not always good with girls. Peter Parker goofed up. There was an issue where Spider-Man got a check and he couldn't cash it because without revealing his identity, so he didn't get the money. It's things like that. It's things like that that remind us, he's just a guy in a costume, and that's what made him so magnetic. And the power in the story is first and foremost the characters. I know that I was taught that bad plotting comes from just trying to come up with scenario after scenario after scenario. The first thing is you create the characters, you put them in a scenario if you have to, and then they should take care of the rest. Honestly, that would be the best way to do it, because if you have the characters leading you from place to place. If you say, okay, so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so in the desert. Okay, and it says, okay, well, blah, blah, blah is, of course, going to try to take the lead, and then she's going to do this, and he's going to do that, and they're going to go make out, and blah, blah, blah. And, so the key is having those good characters there. And then, and I'm not saying that plotting is bad at all, because you do want to have a direction to push the characters into. But it is apparent, people can see when the plot is dominant because the characters suffer, and the characters are kind of being, squashed under the weight of you going, okay, kids, let's go, come on, So definitely you want the characters to be able to express who they are, because that's what sticks with people. People remember a show for the characters.
And don't be afraid to put your characters through the ringer.
That's what J.R.R. Tolkien did, and that's why people like his stuff so much.
Don't be afraid to make your characters' lives a living hell.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we have talked a lot about developing a good plot.
Because that's a very important part. If you're looking at a narrative comic, that's the foundation that everything's built on.
That's absolutely.
So you've got your idea. Now you've got your characters and you've got a plot. We're going to talk about what happens next after that. Does anybody have any questions so far?
The only technical question I had at this point is, how many strips did you have, how many pages did you have ready to go when you put your first page up?
I have
fully utilized, fully drawn, fully, could just post it to Comic Press.
I think for ours we had about half of the first chapter.
You guys are amazing. My first chapter was 70 pages, but
yeah, ours was like 45.
my first chapter was 70 pages, but when the comic first went online, there were 10. Mainly simply because now I hadn't had the 70 done, mind you. When the 10 went up, 10 was all I had done, and by the time they were had been online for a little bit, I had 12 pages done. But 10 probably because it's an okay number for people to thumb through. If you're doing a narrative, you do not want to start out just putting the page 1 as the very first page, because people are going to be like, okay, 1 page, click 2 page, and then, so definitely having just a little bit that people can thumb through and kind of evaluate, kind of let it sink in a little bit, that's a good idea.
Yeah, as far as how many pages we posted at once, we have a 12-page prologue to kind of set up the story and basically set the tone for the entire story, because it's focusing on like the villains plotting things, and so you've got this looming when the main characters who can be kind of goofy show up and start.
Yeah, you kind of give people a taste of what they're getting into.
So we had
the prologue ready to post at once, but as far as having pages done and waiting, we had a little bit more than that.
And how many tracks?
I had 15, but they were posted 1 page at a time. But it wasn't that big of a deal because I only had 80 readers at the time, and most of these people had been followed me over from another art site, so they knew my work. They had seen the development work on Accidental Centaurs, so they kind of already were kind of steeped in it. So I didn't have that to worry about. I really didn't pick up big readership until I started advertising on Kevin and Kel,
Right.
and it went through the roof.
And I'm not saying that I'm not. Don't get me wrong. I'm not at all saying that you can't do one page at a time. Absolutely. I mean,
with a narrative strip, it is a good idea, especially a gag-a-day strip. Not as much. It might be a good idea to have maybe a week's work there, just so that people get an idea of what kind of jokes, what kind of gags you're doing, what kind of the characters are like. But with a narrative strip, having some kind of a prologue to get people hooked, so they want to keep coming back on that regular basis, is an outstanding idea.
Yeah, that actually is another tricky part when you're doing a narrative online, is pacing. Then that's going to affect your update schedule, depending on how far you want the story to progress. Because we're talking something that you could read at once in book format is going to take a lot longer on the internet, and that you might want to take that into consideration when doing a narrative. Just how much do you want per page? Like the reason I put 10 pages up is because 10 pages, if my graphic novel was on film, it's about a minute and a half into it, basically. And because especially in the beginning, you've got a lot of establishing shots. An establishing shot, if you want to do it justice, is going to take up at least half a page. Oh, well, depending on what you're doing.
Yeah, depending on what you're doing, yeah. But
For me, it does. And because I do lots of that manga style stuff. So a lot of times it'll be like, look, a tree, look, a city. See how nice it is. See how much detail I put into it. Just an entire page. It's a city. See, so that's how I do it.
That's one of the problems that I've had, especially when I was first starting out, is feeling the need to cram lots of stuff into a page, because with Shades of Veil, for most of its run, we were doing a page a week. So, and I've known a lot of different comics that have done a page a week and have kept it going. Though I like a little bit of a faster pace myself, but depending on what you can get done at a time.
Yeah, depending. I mean, it's all about what you can manage. I mean,
if I could do 5 days a week, I would.
Totally.
I would. But I do a comic-sized page on each update, and with having to do other freelance work and schlep around for freelance work and all that fun stuff, I'm doing good to get the 3 pages a week. So that's what I'm going to have to do.
And I do 3 pages a week as well, and sometimes because I'm a very firm believer. I mean, I've tried pulling off lots of info in one page, and I've been a fan of comics that do. And depending on what you're doing, it may or may not work. For me, it would not work, and I cannot, I will not. My body refuses to allow me to compromise the pacing of my story. And the thing is, because graphic novels or webcomics, which is just an online version of a graphic novel if you're doing a narrative, it's just like cinema, just like a movie. If there's a slow-mo shot, that means more panels, which means more pages, which means if you want to get that feeling right, you're gonna have to give it a certain amount of pages, and your readers are just gonna have to deal with it. I'm sorry, but this shot is worth it.
Yeah,
So you're gonna appreciate it when you go through the archives a year later. That's all I'm gonna tell you.
That's why it's nice. It's a really good idea to work with a chapter as a whole, because then you can see it as an entire unit and see how all the pages fit together and contribute to the whole, rather than being like, okay, here's this scene, this goes on this page, put it up, this goes on this page, put it up. Because you might get the story moving faster, but sometimes you really don't want to.
And the more you're able to work ahead with your pacing and what you know is coming up, then you can plan on what you need in each page to be able to portray that to your audience.
Like, crap, this page has a huge city panorama, better get started working on that one, whereas next page might only have a few character shots or something.
I mean, I know it'd be awful, but I mean, now I think about it, I'm just thinking of examples. If I were to do a comic version of the Death of Trinity in Matrix Revolutions, I'd probably take an entire month. I mean, we could just do it 3 pages a week, because I'm like, this is important. This is a big character, and she's dying, and it's a big deal. It's worth that. So you gotta sometimes you just gotta bite the bullet. Do what's right for the comic is what's most important.
But plan your pages ahead of time. That way you don't screw yourself. If you put something in a page like page 10, and then you suddenly realize that you have something coming up in page like 17 or 20, or whatever that needs to refer to page 12, or should have happened in page 17 and not page 12, then you have to do a lot of quick thinking.
Well, the way that I get around that is I actually thumbnail out the artwork and the dialogue in the sketchbook, and then I can adjust pacing, I can adjust the flow, I can see when I have to slow time down, when I can speed things up, when I can just jump over a whole scene because it's not necessary, because what happens there is not important enough. It's important, but it's not important enough actually show. I can allude to it in later dialogue or later actions. And then, and I have my blocking already done. I know who's going to be the prominent character in a specific panel. So I know who's going to be the dominant character, who's going to be the secondary characters. All of that's already just thumbnail. I mean, it doesn't have to. I mean, it's basically stick figures. It looks like my stuff. It's about a step up from XKCD in terms of its complexity, but it has all the dialogues out there, so I can read it out. I can hear it out, hear what they're saying. No, that's not what Lenny would say. Lenny would say something even more crass, you know, something like that. So, so I don't work from a script, you know, like you see various books recommend, and the DC Marvel type scripts. I work from my own thumbnails.
Which is that's actually the way exactly how I used to do it. I used to do just thumbnails, and I can tell you to this day I still do thumbnails when it comes to a page that I have a particular vision for, but the page isn't coming up for months, and I'm going, oh, this looks so good, and I just do, I put it down. Definitely, you want to kind of feel out what's right for you. I mean, sometimes it's thumbnails, sometimes it is script writing.
Yeah.
And depending on which project you're doing, like for me, the project I'm on right now, I work best off a script. It might not be that way for another project I'm doing. So, I mean...
What I do is I take our script printouts and I thumbnail on those. If I'll draw out, like, actually I'll go through and divide up the script, draw lines through it to block out, okay, this needs to be in one panel. This person's reaction should probably be in the next panel to add to, like, to employ a certain kind of pause or effect, or, like, it's not quite connected with what the person said before. Just kind of mush it around that way with just dividing up the lines on the page, and then I will, I do this kind of at the same time as I do the thumbnails, like, just drawing in little stick figures to figure out the angles and who's where, and like who, if people are sitting around a table, what angles to the camera need to come from. So I'll do that, just drawing out little images, and then since we do a like full-page graphic novel type comic, the panels need to be certain shapes to fit on the page. So after I have all the panels worked out, like these are the panels that I need, then I'll work on fitting them together, seeing what shapes the panels need to be to both fit on the page and get the right kind of effects for timing and mood and things that I'm looking for. And then I actually have a copy of my manga template printed out, like double-sized on, double-page spread at 5 by 7.5 actual manga book size that I work on, like sketching in the panels in there, and then I write in all the dialogue. And so I have like a scribble version of my entire chapter once I get through all that. And I can hand it to somebody like my brother and say, well, I'll make the stick figures detailed enough that you can tell who it is. And then I'll hand the whole thing to my brother or somebody and say, here, read this. Tell me where it doesn't make sense.
Sounding boards are excellent.
Where it, like where it's too slow, where we need another panel, like if you're confused at anything that's happening, because I know what's supposed to be going on in each place. The reader might not, so.
Yeah, my little brother is my personal Simon Cowell. He will not, I mean, if it's something sucks, he'll tell me. And the biggest thing for me is actually, when I draw something out, I give it to my brother or some other unbiased source, you know, that didn't draw it, because a lot of times I can draw something and somebody won't recognize what is that, because they're not that familiar with my abstraction, you know, the particular way I render something I see. So sounding boards are definite.
Yeah.
We have about 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And that just reminded me. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but if I know one particular topic that's actually kind of important. That if there's one thing I could leave everybody with, it's the issue of hosting. That's one of the most important things when it comes to webcomics. Finding the right host, or maybe even like I am. I personally, I recommend joining a collective. Now that's up to you, because the thing is, what's different about a collective versus a publisher in the real world or something like that is that with a collective, essentially you sometimes it's co-hosted, and you can just go on Google, put in word webcomic collectives, and there's lists. There's tons of them out there. There's basically all this bunch of webcomic artists who team up to support each other by advertising on each other's sites, and they associate with each other, and they help each other get exposure that way, and they help each other at conventions and stuff like that. It helps. I'm a noob. I didn't know anything about the webcomics community until I joined my collective, Darkstar, and that's really actually helped me get my hands around just what on earth is going on here. Of course, it doesn't work for everybody. Some people, they just do it on their own, and it works.
There's a collective called Spider Forest that we're not actually part of, but I know a lot of people who are, and they have just like a banner at the top of the screen on all their sites that says like this is the Spider Forest collective website. Here's another, like a link banner for another comic in the site, and then they have forums and places to interact, like where the creators can talk with each other.
Collectives are especially good because there's one of every kind. There's one. I mean, really, there's collectives for fantasy comics. There's ones that are a little bit of everything. One of the most popular ones is Snafu Comics, which is primarily funny, but also has some serious stuff in it. There's Gamers Paradise, which is primarily gaming comics. And there's minor ones, bigger ones. Some people are really snobby. Some people say like don't if you're good enough we'll find you. Yeah, right. But I mean, and some people are really cool. And smaller ones, bigger ones, etc. But if it's your first time, I definitely recommend a collective, and particularly one where they can actually offer to host you if they can. Because hosting can be tough, because there's a lot of crappy hosts out there, and a lot of hosts that if you're not part of a collective, you'll be submerged. Nobody will know where to find you. Nobody will know you even exist. So being part of a collective can help with a lot of those issues that once you've gotten your comic, and let's say it's as far as webcomics, it's the second coming. It's amazing, and then but nobody knows. Now what? So that was one big fear I had. As a matter of fact, I went into several artistic depressions before I got picked up by a collective, because I didn't even know anybody was reading my stuff. And,
there's a lot of tools out there for getting your work to people, getting people into the site. There's the ranking sites like Top Web Comics, and Buzz Comics seems to have vanished into the ether. But there's a lot of people coming up with new ranking sites. There's one called Hypercore that it actually, I think for my comics, people have added them to the site, and it's like a comic listing. It will inform people when your comic updates. And it's PIPERKA. And there's other like webcomics lists. There's Comicspedia, which is like a wiki for comics, and there's Comic Rank, which will, if you join that, it will look at the numbers of, you kind of install it on your site, you put in a little bit of code, and it gives you a page on their ranking site, and it lists comics by number of actual readers, like people who, I'm not sure if it's by who's their IP addresses, but people who visit at least once a week. So instead of looking at a page of stats, like page views and unique viewers and things, which may or may not be entirely accurate, this one actually works out how many people are return visitors that keep coming back to the site. And people will find your site through those your listings on those sites.
There's also different programs, like we use Google Analytics, that allows you to measure who's going, how long they were there, what pages they looked at, where they're coming from, how often they return.
And that allows you then to go sell advertising.
And also,
It'll give you leads where they came from site-wise, also where they came from world-wise.
Also, another quick thing to mention is a little thing called Project Wonderful.
Yes.
Project Wonderful is a two-bladed sword for us, in that it allows, it's a really great medium and relatively inexpensive for promoting your site, because you can buy ads on all kinds of sites. It's an auction-based system, so you bid as much as you think you can afford, and if you are the winning bidder, then you're on the air. It's also on the flip side, you can sell ad space on your site and generate a little revenue as your site starts to build. It's searchable based on the keywords that you put in for your site. So people who are interested in whatever your strip is about, who have similar interests or want to reach similar people, can easily find you and quickly buy advertising space on your site. You set your prices, or your base price, and hopefully watch it go up, watch the prices go up from there as people compete to be on your site.
Yeah, probably my final word is just that once you get over there, once you figure out what you're going to do, you'll quickly realize just how important at that point getting exposure is. And the final, probably biggest thing for exposure, of course, is conventions. You can network with people, get to know people, get people to look at your stuff that in other scenarios that would have never happened. And there's plenty of ways, there's plenty of people out there who are willing to share their experiences. You know, if you ask them, people who offer very, very interesting and important insights. So I mean,
well, one source for that, and this is a paid site, is Brad Geiger's Webcomic.mp4. Brad is not only is he one of the nicest people that you'd ever meet anywhere, in comics or not, and he has one of those unique laughs on the planet. He is very knowledgeable about building a business around webcomics. Webcomics.com has taken a little bit of criticism because it's behind a paywall. It's $30 a year, and Brad has lined up enough benefits and discounts as part of that membership that the first time you have a banner made through the discount, you get your money back. So, and he's got some pretty big plans for some really cool things that he swore me to secrecy about. I can't say, but I wish I could, because he's really got some big plans for it. But there's also the forums and boards on there, very in-depth articles about the business end of comics and web comics. Getting stuff, when should you do a collection? When should you do a book? When should you start doing conventions? Those sorts of things. The nuts and bolts is addressed on a daily basis on webcomics.com. And again, it's $30 a year. It's not that expensive.
sounds like it's well worth it.
It is. And again, like I said, Brad is, his information, he's been there, he's been doing this since 2000. He knows what he's doing on this. So, and he's assembled a team of people who have been successful. Another one of the writers on there is Robert Koo, who is the business manager for Penny Arcade. You may have heard of them. So, at least they didn't have the bird flu going around at the convention again this year, like last year. But so that's a resource that I'm a member of it. I signed up because I do see things in there that are insights, things that I hadn't thought of or hadn't considered, and also the discounts that he's lined up, or there's some pretty cool discounts there.
Do you have anything for closing since now?
Without going off on even more tangents, well, not tangents, but other subjects and things to cover. That's pretty much just jump in, see if you like it. There's a lot of resources out there for the more particular aspects of comics creating, storyboarding,
Indeed.
artwork, and everything.
Most people are pretty friendly. You can stop by their site and ask, like, I'm new to this. I just have a couple questions. Would you mind answering them?
You know, and if they don't, you know, I've done the same thing. Don't hold it against them. Just try the next person.
Yeah.
And you know, just beware. You've chosen a noble craft. You know, so. You know.
A good set of books, if you haven't looked at them yet, is Scott McCloud's, especially Understanding Comics, to break down why this medium works and is different from any other medium of expression. And Reinventing Comics, not so much, which is the middle book. It's kind of a little dated because it talks a lot about micropayments. But his third book, Making Comics, is more about the nuts and bolts of actually drawing the comic and keeping that creative flow going, things like that. But all three of the books, Scott McCloud's insights are very valuable, and it's all done in a comic book format too.
Cool. So thank you guys for coming to the panel. Thank you for wanting to make stories for all us attention deficit people who can't concentrate on prose.
And we look forward to seeing you up here next year.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you want to take our cards, if you have any questions.
Oh, yes.